"You're not invited," he said. I set the phone on the workbench and watched the saw blade coast to a stop. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. The blade's whisper faded into the kind of quiet that shows you what your heart is doing. Late winter light pushed through my shop windows and found the dust hanging there, small stars orbiting nothing. I touched the warm rim of the blade and didn't feel much of anything at all. My name is Sam Whitaker. I've spent my life building rooms for other people to speak in. School auditoriums, banquet halls, a small theater that smelled like velvet and paint. Thousands of screws, miles of tape, endless queues. You learn certain things building illusions. You learn how crowds breathe. You learn what happens when the light comes up at the wrong time. My daughter Lena loved to nap in curled sawdust when she was small. When her mother died, I built a cradle out of reclaimed maple from her grandma's porch. I carved swallows into the headboard because swallows come home whether you call them or not. That cradle still sits under a tarp near the back door. I had been sanding one of its rails when the call came in. "Sam?" Nathan's voice, friendly as a brochure. "We've decided? Well, Lena and I agree. It would be better for the day if you didn't attend." Better for the day. Like I was a storm front, you could check on your phone. I didn't say much. There are times you can fix a thing, and times you can't. I set the phone down and let the shallow breath of the saw die. My hands remembered making 100 benches that held 1,000 strangers while someone else told them a story. Funny how the old body knows. Brace, lift, release. He had been whittling away at me for a year. Little exclusions dressed as logistics. No need for a father of the bride speech. We're keeping it modern. He would walk with Lena down the aisle because it's our shared moment. I could help with costs if I wanted, but he had sponsors for the decor, partnerships with vendors for exposure. Even the florals had a discount code. Lena loved him, said he made decisions so she didn't have to. I tried to meet her where she lived, which these days was an apartment full of bright plants and soft rugs and a standing mirror where she practiced, almost unconsciously, how she looked when she laughed. The last time we talked about the guest list, she used "we" in that careful way you use a borrowed pronoun. I heard my own emissions in the room between us. There were seasons when I was a ghost who came home carrying splinters of applause, hole springs, where my workbench was neater than the kitchen table. Grief made a foxhole of me. Kids learn to talk to the horizon when the person they need becomes a hill in the distance. But I taught her how to square a frame. I taught her how to hold a level at eye height and trust what the bubble tells her, not what she wishes. And that counts for something, even if I don't know how much anymore. I texted her after the call. "I hear you. I love you. I'm here if you need me," she replied with a heart, and then another message that started with, "Nathan feels," and I put the phone down again. The light outside slid from pewter to nickel. Across the street, pigeons bummed along the eaves of the hardware store, like old men agreeing about the weather. Pride is a funny bevel. You said it wrong and the cut wanders. It'd be easy to say I didn't care, to fold into that satisfying hardness men learn when they don't know what else to do. But I cared like a bruise cares about a thumb. When humiliation visits, it spreads out and opens drawers you didn't know were in your chest. I pulled on my jacket and walked to the theater a few blocks over. I've hung more lights in that place than stars in our town sky. The manager, Lacey, used to be one of my students. She runs the house now with a whistle lanyard and a soft voice that can move a mountain. "What happened?" she asked, because I don't drop by on winter afternoons without a reason. "Wedding," I said. "I've been invited to stay home." She winced. "He's the one with the wedding channel, right? The sponsored aisle runner?" "That's the one." From the catwalk above the stage, the world looks tidy. Circles of light, black curtains, clean lines. Down on the floor, it's tape and sweat and improvisation. That gap between how it looks and how it is, that's where you can do a lot of damage if you're careless, or a lot of good if you're patient. I watched Lacey adjust a shutter cut so the spill didn't flare on the proscenium. One quarter turn, and the picture sharpened. People who live for optics, I said, hate surprises. True. They hate improvisation. Preach. They hate not owning the room. Sam, she said, what are you asking? I'm asking who's their venue, who's their florist, who's handling sound, and whether any of them owe me a favor they want to cash in. That's not a small ask. It's not a big one either. I smiled. I'm not going to ruin anything. I'm going to show something that's already there. She took her phone out, looked at me once, then started typing. Here's the thing about a small town. The same 24 names sit behind 100 curtains. The wedding was booked at the Lakeside Conservatory, a glass house by the water that hosts galas in summer and checkbox bows in spring. I helped install their lighting grid the year it was built. The florist, Mina, learned color theory by painting flats in my shop. The sound tech, Josh, played bass in the pit for 3 of our musicals and still runs cable like it's a prayer. Lacey gave me numbers. Don't make me regret this, she said, which I took for a blessing. On my walk home, I kept thinking about the cradle under the tarp. Maple remembers the heat of a hand. If you leave it alone long enough, it will give you back the shape of something you forgot. Nathan's power lived in the story he could point a camera at. I had spent my life building rooms where people saw what they needed. If he was staging a life, I was going to stage a moment he couldn't edit. Not nasty, not violent, just a seam he couldn't stop from splitting. That night, when the thawing rain started, I opened the tarp and ran my palm down the cradle rail. Swallow wings curled through dust. I set the piece on the bench and fetched my chisels. If I couldn't walk her down an aisle, I could put something in her hands when she did. The next morning, I called Mina, then Josh, then the conservatory manager, a patient woman named Rhea I'd once watched talk a donor out of climbing a ladder in dress shoes. I pitched kindness. I asked for small allowances. Nobody likes the idea of a father cut from a daughter's wedding. People will help you if your plan is a mercy disguised as a trick. By dusk, I had a list of what I needed to build, and who I needed to nudge, and where I needed to be the day they said their modern vows. Standing in the doorway of my shop with the rain pecking at the street, I realized I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt ready. I started with the cradle rail. I shaved it until the maple sang. Then I carved a keyhole into one end and inlaid a thin brass plate beneath. I stamped the plate with a swallow and a date. The spring Lena took her first steps across our living room, her socks full of my sawdust. In the underside of the rail, where a hand might find it by accident, I chiseled 4 words my wife used to whisper when the house felt like a boat. Come home safe, bird. Mina's part was simple. She'd been told that bouquets were props and should read on camera, which is the kind of direction that makes florists rage. Smile. She agreed to weave a narrow satin ribbon through the stems of Lena's bouquet, a ribbon that would be attached to a small maple charm the size of a thumb. The charm would be the end of a key that fit the hidden keyhole in the rail. Josh's part was simpler. Load a short ambient track into the Prelude playlist and label it Conservatory Rain underscoring, so nobody bothered it. The track was 30 seconds long. The sound of our old porch swing on a damp spring night, recorded on my phone years ago when Lena had the flu and I rocked her on that swing in the dark while tiny frogs sang like broken violins. Rhea's part was a matter of logistics. She placed the cradle rail, dressed in linen, on the welcome table where guests signed their names. A white card, italic script, touch for luck. She didn't tell Nathan. She didn't ask. She just set a pretty piece of wood on a table, like it had always been part of the plan. Lacey's part would come later. My part was patience. I didn't talk to Lena except to send her a photo of the river at first thaw. We had a tradition. When the ice broke, we each sent the other a picture of the water carrying winter away. She replied with one of her own, the river looking almost black under a sky the color of tin. You always catch the ripples, she wrote. Only because I've learned where to stand, I replied, then erased the second sentence I wanted to add. You can learn it too. In those days of sawing and sanding and calling in small favors, a truth started tapping on the window like a moth. If I had been a better father in the years after her mother's death, would there be a Nathan in our lives now? It isn't a question with an answer, but it is a weight with a shape. I remember one autumn when I chose a load-in over her school play. She was a tree in the background holding still. She asked me afterward if there were any tricks to standing like something that belongs. I told her to plant her feet and soften her knees. Then I rushed back to the theater and forgot the feeling of her hand in mine. People make terrible choices when they need certainty more than kindness. That's the hidden truth I carried like a nail in my pocket. Nathan didn't steal my daughter. He offered her a room where the furniture never moved. I'd offered her a shipyard. The week of the wedding, I walked the conservatory as a consultant, which is a word that means both everything and nothing. Rhea let me check the dimmer pack. Josh and I ran through queues. The house smelled like greenery and glass. Nathan arrived with his entourage and 3 cameras, jacket slung over his shoulder like a promise. He didn't notice me right away, which was all right by me. He noticed the welcome table. "What's this?" he asked a planner in a headset. "Local touch," she said. "Guests like tactile things." He ran a finger over the maple and looked at his reflection in the brass. "Sure, keep it, but move it left for the sightline." I marked that in my head. He couldn't see an object except in relation to a lens. Out in the parking lot, men from town were assembling quietly with lanterns. Not protest, not spectacle. A vigil that wasn't for the living or the dead, but for a promise between the two. They were carpenters and electricians, I'd worked beside. Kids who grew up and kept one trick I taught them. Grandfathers who had built docks and fences and luck. Each carried a small shop-made lantern I'd given them over the years. When night fell, they would line the conservatory path. They would lift their lights when Lena passed by, not to steal the moment but to make it warmer than whatever Nathan thought of next. They didn't know why. I told them a father had been told to stay home. That was enough. The afternoon tilted towards ceremony. Soft music, whisper hurries, someone laughing too loud. I stood in the balcony with the follow spot, pretending to check an iris. The bouquet arrived from Mina, peonies like full moons, fronds like breath. Ribbon tucked inside like a secret. I saw Lena's hands when she reached for it, steady in a way that made my chest feel both light and heavy. Nathan scanned the aisle like a general on a map. He directed the videographer to center on the arch, the florals, his own face. His mother adjusted a sleeve. His father said nothing but looked at everything as if the price might show if he stared long enough. The prelude softened. Josh slid in our 30 seconds of porch swing in spring rain. It sounded like memory you could walk into. People's eyes went a little wet, and they didn't know why. Nathan frowned and glanced at the speakers. He didn't recognize anything, unless it tagged him on a screen. When the music changed and the doors opened, the conservatory air took that breath. Rooms take right before something real arrives. Lena stepped in on her own 2 feet, because she has always had them. She didn't need an arm to be carried. She needed a room that said, with honesty, who she was walking past. The bouquet lifted, the ribbon tipped, the little maple charm swung out and kissed her wrist. She paused, felt it, and in that pause found the string and pulled. The charm came away in her hand, warm from the flowers. She looked down at it, and I could see recognition ripple across her. Maple swallow carved into brass. She closed her fingers around it the way you close a hand around something that fits because it came from your house. Nathan didn't see any of that. He was watching the camera. She took 3 steps and saw the welcome table. People had touched the rail and smiled without knowing why. She veered just a couple inches and let the charm find the keyhole. It slipped in with the quiet click that tools make when they meet their match. She turned it. The plate lifted on a hinge and a small drawer slid open, a space no bigger than a deck of cards. Inside was a folded scrap of the cloth that once lined her cradle. Under the cloth, a note. 4 lines, same ink I used to sign permission slips. This wood held you when the world was louder than you were. If you need me today, turn toward the doors. I'll never block your way, Lena. I'll just hold the light. She didn't cry. She breathed, then smiled like a secret had decided to be kind to her. Then she walked the aisle. Nathan's mouth did a small twitch that said, "That wasn't on the shot list." The ceremony went on. Vows that sounded like they'd been written by a tasteful committee. Rings that gleamed like clean mirrors. When the officiant asked, "Who supports this union?" the room hummed without any single voice claiming the line. And outside, lanterns began to glow as the day slid into the soft place between afternoon and evening. We moved to the reception. People do and say strange things around cake. Lacey had arrived with a crew to support a mobile lighting installation, which was one way to describe what we'd planned. Her job was to raise the room's heart rate when it needed raising and lower it when truth needed a place to land. Nathan took the mic. He thanked sponsors by handle and made jokes that were more about their setups than their punchlines. He said tonight was about family and posted a selfie with his own face filling most of the frame. I could have let it go there, but one more cue remained. Lacey nodded at me, then at Josh. The band slid into a low run of strings, unspecific like a door half open. I stepped into the service corridor between the conservatory and the deck where cooling air took the heat from the day. Men with lanterns waited along the path, hands folded over the handles of the light. The plan was never to interrupt anything. The plan was to be undeniable if somebody looked. "Legacy dance," the MC announced, reading from the card Nathan had approved. "A moment to honor the people who've built this couple's foundation." That was my language. Nathan had liked the word legacy because it photographs well. Anyone, the MC said, who taught Lena or Nathan something with their hands, tying a knot, planting a tree, baking bread, setting a ladder, please step to the edge of the floor. Half a dozen people rose, then a dozen, then more. A neighbor who taught Lena to braid a rope halter. Mina with leaf-stained fingers. Josh with a coil of cable over his shoulder like a sash. Lacey wiping at her eyes as if a gnat had decided to adore her. People who remembered the girl who climbed apple trees and learned to measure sugar without a cup. They stood there quietly as the music gathered itself. It was a pretty picture. It was also a test. Because some rooms, when you fill them with memory, become stronger than a narrative you imposed on them. People feel that. People change. Nathan felt it and panicked. He cut across the dance floor and hissed at the MC. "This is not the choreography." The mic in the MC's hand brushed Nathan's lapel. A tiny sound bloomed in the speakers, that harsh private tone everyone recognizes immediately, the hiss-whisper of a man trying to control something that's slipping free. "Pull them back," he said, still close to the mic. "We're not doing a handy person parade." Every head turned. Every camera followed. Some moments don't need lights. They bring their own. He tried to smile and failed. "Please be seated," he said, too sharp, and a murmur bled through the glass walls like rain through old brick. Lena looked from the line of people to Nathan to the lanterns glowing beyond the doors. She didn't look for me, because she didn't expect me to be there. She looked where the light was. "Nathan," she said quietly, but the room had decided to be quiet with her, and so everyone heard. "This is my life. I'm managing it." She held his eyes the way you hold a level, deliberate and unmoved. That's the problem. Outside, the lanterns lifted, one by one, as men and women who build things saluted someone who was built for herself. The mid-story twist, the one that changed me, came not from him, but from me. In his anger, I saw my own seasons of control made of nails and late nights and loving the shape of things more than the people inside them. I recognize him not because he was like me now, but because he was like me when grief was my foreman. Knowing that didn't soften what needed to be done. It made me careful with the cut. You can't put a house back together if you tear it recklessly. Nathan reset his jaw for a performance. He raised the mic as if to argue with the air. Lacey dimmed the room by one slow count and then opened the doors to the deck. The lantern light reached in and touched the floor. Humans follow warm light the way vines bend toward sun. People stepped back without being asked. Lena, holding her bouquet, walked to the threshold and paused. The ribbon brushed her wrist. She touched the maple charm again, then turned, not to me, because I was just a shadow near the service corridor, but to the path lined with quiet, steady hands. And she stepped outside. I could have walked away then and called it enough. But revenge has its own gravity. And if you don't name the coordinates, it'll pull you through places you didn't mean to go. Nathan found me near the service corridor because control is a scent, and I was one of the few things in the room that didn't belong to him. He came quick, silent the way men get when they don't want witnesses. You did this. I kept my hands at my sides. No, I said. You did this when you confused a wedding with a campaign. You're not welcome here. I gathered. You sabotaged my day. I looked at the open doors where lantern light drew a slow highway across the floor. I didn't sabotage anything. I brought in a little weather and asked your roof to be honest. He stepped close. You will leave. I will, I said. But you should know one thing first. He waited because men like him live on previews. I could have broken more than your moment, I said. I know a dozen stories you might not want in the room. The unpaid photographer from last fall. The vendor you promised exposure instead of a check. The assistant you texted late on a Sunday because you liked the way your name looks on somebody else's phone. His pupils beat once, like a hard swallow. I'm not here to ruin you, Nathan. I'm here to give my daughter an accurate map. His mouth worked around a sentence and found nothing he could post. You banished me because you thought I was a bad shot, I said. But I've been setting sightlines my whole life. The room doesn't point at you anymore. That should have been the end. My plan had been to step into the quiet outside and make myself small so Lena could make herself exact. But revenge is never just about the target. It's about what you become while you're aiming. The final twist, mine waited at the welcome table, stilled beneath the linen. Lena stepped back inside, cheeks pink from the air. She looked calmer than anyone else in the building. Nathan tried to take her elbow. She let him touch her sleeve and not her skin. I need a minute, she said. With me, he said. Alone, she answered, gentle but clear. He flushed in a way expensive men hate to flush, not out of shame but from the sudden absence of audience. She went to the welcome table. She looked at the maple again like a person recognizes a childhood street from a third-story window. Then she lifted the linen skirt and found the small drawer I'd left for her. The cloth lay inside, cradle soft. Under it, another note, this one folded twice and sealed with a thumbprint of varnish. She cracked the seal and read. This was the part I hadn't told anyone. Not Lacey, not Mina, not the men with lamps. The note began with a confession. When your mother died, I left in a way that looked like work, but felt like running. I chose quiet rooms over loud pain. I told myself the house needed money and the theater needed me. But really, I didn't know how to hold your hurt without breaking. I failed you by letting the job be my alibi. You were a tree on a bare stage, and I left you there too long. If you forgive me, let it be, because I'm not that man now. If you don't, let it be, because forgiveness should be a free choice, not a burden placed on a daughter's hands. Either way, my work today is to show you the pattern of a man who wants your life small, so his looks big. You can love him and still leave this room with yourself standing upright. I will be outside by the service corridor, not blocking any door, holding a light. If you want me to walk you anywhere, away, toward, or simply across, I will match your step and keep my mouth shut. She folded the paper, looked to the doors, and found me where I told her I'd be. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She nodded once, an old stage cue, ready when you are. Nathan saw the notes in her hand and lost his mask. What's that? He demanded, too loud, the mic on the bandstand catching his tone like a net. Guests shifted in the kind of silence that can't be edited later. Truth, Lena said. Whose? Mine. He reached for the paper. She stepped back. He laughed then, not because anything was funny, but because men like him use laughter like a fog machine. This is drama, he declared, turning to the crowd as if a lens had risen out of their faces. We planned a simple evening, and someone decided to make it about himself. I could have taken the shot. I could have pulled the trigger on every petty sin and every unpaid invoice and the time he bragged about training my daughter out of certain words. But the saw blade in my head, the one that started spinning when he said I wasn't invited, was finally at rest. A good cut doesn't need force, it needs alignment. I stepped forward far enough to be seen, and not enough to be the center. I made a gift, I said. That's all. You're not welcome, he repeated. Because when control slips, repetition feels like safety. That's a rule, I said, not a truth. Lena stared at the lanterns outside. The line of light bent with the breeze and held. She put the note in her bouquet, reached to her hair, and took out the two small pins that fastened her veil. She set the veil on the welcome table atop the maple rail and smoothed it with her palm. Then she turned to Nathan the way a person turns to a door to measure if it will fit in a frame. Here's what will happen, she said, not loud but carrying. We will dance with the people who taught us something with their hands. We will cut the cake. You will not speak for me again tonight. He opened his mouth, but whatever he reached for had left the room. We danced. I didn't touch the floor. Mina's husband swung her. The neighbor who taught rope halters spun her granddaughter. Josh shuffled like cables were around his ankles and smiled like a kid. Lacey took a picture. She will never post. Nathan stood in a small pond he made himself and watched the river go elsewhere. People didn't avoid him. They just forgot to look where he stood. That can ruin a man if he's built of mirrors. When the cake was cut, he tried one more speech. Words came out of him like screws in wet wood. Nothing held. He looked at me once like he wanted me gone, and then realized I had never been the thing in his way. The night thinned. Guests drifted like leaves you can't rake because they're doing their own chores. Lanterns winked out one by one, as men and women with work tomorrow went home to their own true rooms. At the truck, Lena found me. She tucked her arm into mine and leaned her head on my shoulder. I'm not leaving him tonight, she said. I'm leaving the story of him. We'll see what's left when the camera goes to sleep. I'll be here either way, I said. She laughed, small and real. I know. We didn't rush a goodbye. We stood and looked at the water as if we could see spring arriving from far downriver. She didn't ask me to forgive her for choosing him, and I didn't ask her to forgive me for the years I drifted. We aren't a balance sheet. We're a port swing on a damp night, moving because a hand knows how to push and a body knows how to come back. Months later, after a summer full of hard conversations that don't fit on a grid, after a fall where leaves taught their usual lesson about letting go, Lena called to say she had moved into a small place with sunlight in the mornings. She kept the maple rail on a shelf by the door. She didn't ask me to help with the heavy lifting, but I showed up anyway with pizza and a new set of anchors, because drywall isn't a promise, it's a polite suggestion. Nathan posted a statement online so tidy you could eat off it. He pivoted his content. He'll be fine as long as rooms keep letting him walk in, pretending the light is his. I kept teaching kids to square frames and trust the bubble. The theater still needs a level hand. Lacey still runs the house like a Mercy. Josh still sets cables like lines in a poem. Mina still makes color out of air. Every so often, on a quiet evening, I take the cradle rail down and run my palm over the swallow's wing. I think about the first phone call and the last lantern going out, and the human habit of mistaking a camera for care. I didn't get to walk my daughter down an aisle. It turns out I got to do something steadier. The best revenge wasn't the cut I made. It was learning when to stop the blade,